Tech Talks, House Rules. Join us on AVE Live, Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join us on Zoom. Watch on Facebook or YouTube from the AV Educate page, or register as an attendee for the webinar. Live Q&A. Our guest will lead us through a guided demo and conversation about tonight's topic. We will take your questions and comments throughout the show. Don't wait until the end. Get your questions and comments in early to shape the conversation. We don't know it all. We're human and don't claim to know everything. We may demonstrate or discuss one way to do something, but that doesn't mean it's the only way to do it. If you found another way that is easier or yields better results, please share with the community so we can all learn together. Follow AV Educate. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and have a library of content on YouTube. Join us on Zoom for AV Tech Talks and to become a member of our community on Discord, where the conversations, the learning, and the sharing continues. We are where you are. Place your phone over the QR code to come learn more about AV Educate.
Hey, welcome back to AV Tech Talks. How's everybody doing tonight? We are here. It's already September. It's mid-September, and we're still doing virtual events. We're still doing more in-person events, and then of course there's those hybrid events. So that's kind of what we're going to focus on today, is a little bit about hybrid events and video switching. I'd love to hear from people on the panel. Anybody doing, other than Omar, who seems to be at a hybrid event at the moment, anybody else doing hybrid events currently? Chris, what kind of stuff are you working on?
So the one we just did the beginning of September, beginning of September was for Bacardi. We did a hybrid event with them, full green screen, custom overlays and fill-ins and everything like that. 7 people in person and over 1,500 on the Zoom side that was actually watching and paying attention. And we also had incorporated vMix calls, and then we got another one at the end of the month. That one's going to kind of be the same thing, but we're not using green screen on that one. But yeah, doing a lot of ins and outs, 3 camera setups with green screens and using vMix to control the whole thing.
Very cool. Very cool. Sorry, I think, was it Justin or Dave who had their hand up also for doing hybrid events?
Dave, I did one a month or so ago at the Mint Museum in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it was in a tent, and we had 2 cameras, and I just maxed out an ATEM Mini Extreme. And so we could stream out, and I could switch both screens in the tent with different feeds. And I could have incoming people, and it was a mind boggler because it was my first time using the ATEM Mini Extreme, and it was fun. Figured it out.
Cool. Very cool. How about you, Justin?
I'm actually kind of all traditional or all virtual with this month so far. I haven't really I had some last month. But yeah, actually have a traditional full setup going this week.
Very cool. Very cool. I've been doing a little bit of both. Just some stuff that's been full in person, some stuff that's been virtual, and so I guess all three, and some hybrid stuff. And I'm actually super glad that Omar wanted to talk about hybrid tonight, because I had a couple very interesting hybrid events that maybe weren't the most thought out in the pre-planning phase, and not necessarily that they weren't well planned out, but there were other challenges within the venue, because we were using some venue installed infrastructure that you also had to contend with, and it became very, very difficult. So the one thing I'm seeing is, if you're not already in this hybrid kind of mindset and planning for these things, like Omar is going to talk about, then, if you approach it as either the way you've been doing virtual for the last, 18 or so months, or the way you were doing in person prior to that, then you're probably going to run into complications that either are unforeseen or that just, creep up on you, and now you're going to have to solve problems on site, which I much prefer to solve problems in the shop than on site. So that's kind of been my experience. Has been very, very interesting. Lots of sweating, lots of making things happen at the very last minute to pull off the show. So with that, we'd love to hear your experiences. So if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook or right here in the Zoom webinar, let us know in the chats kind of what you've been experiencing. And of course, if you have questions throughout the show, post those in the chats as well. Put them in the queue, and we will get to them live here. With that, Omar, why don't you tell us about what you're doing with hybrid, and then maybe a little bit about what we're going to see tonight.
Yeah, so I'll jump in here real quick. And what I'm doing tonight pretty much is sorry, my voice is a little raspy here. I've been talking a lot today. There's a lot of rehearsals going on. But it's pretty much today I'm doing a hybrid event, which you guys can see behind me. So a big shout out to Sardis event for allowing us to do this here through the program for you guys to kind of see and learn it. And big shout out to Kurt also, who's the lead on this, who's doing a phenomenal job of keeping us together. And like Ed had said just a minute ago, one of the things that has been very, sorry, I'm double hitting myself. One of the things that have been very useful is that everything's been planned out. Everything's been phenomenally planned out, and it's really, really good to just be on a show where I have this almost Q to Q between the tech side and the planner and the meeting side of what's going to happen on both ends. So we had a whole day set up and a whole day rehearsal today, and today was really cool because before we even got to doing anything, there you go, camera's back. Before we got to do anything, I was already ready to go. So I had already made my presets, my cues, my keys. I needed 3 keys for this. I'm doing a little things on a bit on the fly here just because I'm used to this switcher right here. Real quick, this is a Ross Carbonite, which you guys can see in the other zoom side here. And we'll get to that in a second once we get there. But this is a Ross Carbonite Black. And what was cool about this particular show when we were doing the pre-pro was that I had a look book for my shots. So I have about 4 different looks that I have to accomplish. And out of those looks, 2 of them are kind of different looks that were the same. So I changed between a Zoom caller coming in and a presenter coming in here live. So essentially that DVE key is just being swapped out live for me on my end instead of creating multiple things. Now, I didn't create macros for anything because there's not as much shots as I thought I would need to do, which was something I thought about doing when I first came in the show, just have a lot of macros created so that it was easier to kind of push a button and go with it. But after seeing the show flow and everything like that, I kind of changed gears here. And in a little bit, we'll kind of walk to that switch, and I'll show you the layout here. But it's a 2ME switcher. One is going straight to the stream, and one is going straight to the rooms. And I called one screens because I have 2 screens there. I have 2 DSMs, which I'm auxing out right now. And I have the stream side is sending 2 feeds out, which are being DA'd, and then I have a return feed to myself, which is a single return feed, essentially, which is going to send audio and video to myself. And then everything's routed out. So the point of tonight's kind of talk essentially is to show you that you don't just need a media server. So a lot of times we do these talks about the vMixes or E2s or Aqualines essentially, and what you can do with them. And I know we haven't done an Aqualine one in particular yet, and we haven't really done too many switcher stuff yet. So this was a great opportunity to kind of talk about a switcher and that kind of workflow within the industry and how things are happening. What's really cool about this particular setup though is that now that it is kind of me on this screen and there is a iPhone over here, I can kind of walk around and show you stuff. So before I get into that real quick, I just want to fully disclose here that the Sardis events really gets tons of props for letting us do this because We've done a lot of shows with different companies, Ed, me, Chris, and everybody who's kind of in the background, and we've asked a lot to do these things, and we constantly get told not to, right? So what ends up happening is that when you end up doing these shows, they kind of don't give you permission because it kind of gives out the back secret here. But for this one, we kind of have a full setup here, and we have a full kind of walk around to do it. So I don't have access to Facebook right now, so I can't see if there's any comments running in. If you guys want to keep me honest, let me know, and I'll stop or answer a question. Before I get into that, Dave, I wanted to ask you real quick, just in particular to this setup. You said you're running your streaming side through an ATEM. So did you guys have, for your hybrid, do you have like one going to the live and then another switcher with another operator going to the stream? Is that how you guys are setting that up?
So what we did on that one particular event, and it was just a one-day wonder, I had the PowerPoint directly routed or DA'd to one screen. I had the main out or aux out on the ATEM Extreme going to the other screen, so I could switch either the remote source or whatever into it. And then I had the USB out going into the stream, going straight out.
Yeah, and
to OBS or whatever it was.
No, that's perfect, and I love the way I love that setup in particular because obviously for hybrid events we need that 2ME functionality to do both live and in person, and you don't always need to have a 2ME is what I'm trying to get to with that, right? So you can't have two regular switchers or two ATEMs, for example, as long as you can DA your sources. One person controls the stream side, one person controls the live side. That is another way to do these, right? We don't need to go to some extremes that we do, but obviously if you're a business owner and you own the gear, use the gear that you own, make it work what you have, right? If you are new and up and coming and stuff and vMix is kind of your go-to, maybe you might want to transition yourself to be, hey, I'll be the vMix operator for your virtual side to work in conjunction to what you already own for your streaming, for the live side, right? So that's another way you guys can kind of think about. And when you guys tune into the podcast side, we talk about these things a lot where, how can you better yourself as an individual and as a business owner for yourselves? Those are the things we talk about there. And so this is, again, hybrid is, or AV in general and hybrid in particular, we use all kinds of gear to make things work. And right now it's been the go-to because vMix was kind of that initial push for everybody because it was in everybody's mouths, right? Everybody knew vMix, everybody knew Zoom. That was the initial thing going on. Now we're starting to get back into that hybrid mode or one or the other mode. And, we're using the gear that we own because the margins have changed for what it comes for AV. And this show in particular, Sardis has a bunch of shows going on right now, one in Vegas, and they have a couple of studios. And the studios that they have are using Spiders, they're using the Aqualons, they're using high-end switchers, they're using vMix and some of the stuff. So this is kind of like they own this. It's a high-end switcher, and they said, well, this is what we own. Let's do the show this way because everything else is in use already. Again, this is using what you own, and getting the operator and the crew for this, obviously was an issue because of the labor shortages. This Ross Carbonite is not something I use all the time. I did training on it a few months ago, which is great. Honestly, a good refresher course. I hadn't touched one before that training in probably 2 years. I'd been in shows with them. I'd been around people that use them all the time, but I hadn't really been the operator. So that refresher course really helped me out with this one because the Ross is such a intricate piece of machinery that it's really, really customizable when it comes to switchers. You can do a lot of this. You can do a Blackmagic, a lot of the button mapping and a lot of the changing of colors and things like that to make it easier for yourself, which I obviously will show you some of that on here. But you can also change the MEs. You have MEs 1 and 2. You have mini MEs. You have keys. You can do if once you start getting to bigger things with it, you can start doing mini MEs to get more keys out of yourself. You can start doing it to get more DVEs. You can get into a lot of problems with that too, where you kind of trying to feed back from 1 ME to 2 ME, 2 ME to 3 ME, 3 ME to 4 ME to try to extend your backgrounds and your layer abilities, which then means you got to feed this into feed 1 into 2, 2 into 3, 3 into 4 to get X amount of pip windows. And then there's different things you can do with that. So unlike what you were used to when it comes to media servers, where I can just drag an input into a layer, resize it very quickly, on a switcher it's different, right? You have to remember that you have to do a DV and you have to do a key, and these things have to be resized, and then you can add a border on it, and it can be a color. What's interesting about the Ross Carbonite, though, is they have what's called dashboard, and dashboard lets you kind of get into there, do a little more sub-menu stuff, and get a little more deeper into the abilities of it. There is a mix that I'm doing for this show, which we'll kind of discuss a little bit here too, between what I do on the console itself and what I do on the dashboard, only because it's faster for me to do it this way. One of the things, like I said, I was going to do earlier was macros. I was going to literally create those on the board, record my macros, save that, go back to the dashboard to redo my timing and everything like that. That would have just been easier. The aux is on this. It is faster for me to go to the output side and change my auxes around than it is to do it on the board side. And hold on, let me stop real quick. I see Ed, you got your hand raised.
So I just wanted to, before we get too deep into the weeds, I want to take one step back for some people who may have tuned in and heard that alphabet soup of acronyms that you were throwing out there. Maybe we can back up for people who maybe don't always work on high level switchers. Talk about what an ME is, what a DVE is, what a PIP, what the things that we kind of take for granted because we work in this field all the time. What are some of those things, if you don't mind taking the step back for maybe some people who don't have that knowledge yet?
Yeah, so let's do this. Let me walk away from this one. I'm gonna grab the other phone there. I'll change the audio settings in there for a second. So if you guys give me 1 minute, I'll change that and I'll kind of walk through it and give you guys a visual of what I'm saying as I'm doing it. And then this camera won't be going out of focus as often here. So give me 1 second. I'm gonna go ahead and mute this one and go to the other one and get on that one.
I'll go ahead and cover some of those glossary terms. ME, in a traditional switcher, you have a preview bus where you have a row of buttons, and you see the rows of buttons when he takes the switcher. It usually starts at the bottom row, and that's what you want to see in preview before you take it to screen. So you just want to take a quick look at it. There's on the multi-viewer, you see preview, and then once you transition or move the T-bar or hit the take button or go, then it goes to the program side of that ME or that bus. And then that's what's actually live. So an ME is short for multi-effects, and it usually consists of a preview and a program bus. You see that the bottom two rows, the bottom one's preview, the next one up is program. So if you want to take something directly to program, you hit it on the second row. If you want to see it first, you hit it on the bottom row. And then DVE is short for digital video effects. And that's what you would typically use to make a key or a PIP. And you see some of the buttons there. That one said chroma key, I believe. And so when you're hearing something that says DVE, it's just it's a broadcast term for a PIP or a key. And a key is where you're taking out like the green in the green screen behind someone and replacing it with something else. Omar, are we back with you?
Yep. Yeah. So you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah. So that was great. It's just like we planned it out. I followed you through exactly what the script was, so I appreciate that. I'm just kidding. That was actually really good. So I'll go back to the DVE for a second. I know you guys can't see it, but this is the DVE button here, and we'll do key 3. So right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to this side, and this is just for quick, just so you guys know when I was talking about a trim, so a mix effect, right? This is my ME1, is this here, and this is ME2, which is up here. Now, what I want to make sure that we're clear on is that this ME here down here and this one up here is the exact same layout. So all these are still programs. These are all programs up here. Colors are changed because I've changed some colors here. This is still program. This is still program. What this means is that I can send out, like we were saying earlier. So our program 1, so ME1 here, program 2. So these are my 2 MEs right here that you guys see that I'm switching out. So if I go to our screens, which is my live, which I'm calling live here, right? And I go to playback 1 and playback 2, you're going to see that down here. So previews on 1 and 2 is right here. All right. And then if I go to the top here and I go to, let's say on ME2, I go to graphics on preview and graphics 2 on program, which luckily they're different right now. Up here, you can see this is graphics 1 and graphics 2. And essentially what Dave was saying is so on the bottom ME, right? So this is where I got my playbacks, right? And I'll change this up to do, let's say I do zoom 1, zoom 2, which you guys can see is what we're looking at here, which is me. It's me a little infinity effect there. But if I go there now and I come to this ME panel down here, right? And I click on the cut button. I'll do it so we can see it here. I'm gonna hit this button right here. You're gonna see that it transitions, right? Or does it cut? And I can use it, or I can use the T-bar this way. Now, same thing. So on the top side here, I have, well, let me just change this out because it's gonna look weird. All right. So then I have on the second ME here, right? We have graphics 1, and graphics 2, which is on program right now. Same thing now. So this upper panel here is my ME2, right? So I'm gonna go to this section here, so you can see it. Here's 1, here's 2. I'll hit the cut button, and let's see if I can get that angle for you guys. Cut, and it just takes it from preview to program. Now, what Dave was talking about when it comes to DVEs, and I'll do this on 1 here with the screen side. So I have DVE here and Q3 selected. selected right now, which is not what I'm going to do. I'm going to come over here, check my background first. So hit background here. You can see that it's not going anywhere. So for background, I'm going to go to my ME1 on preview so I can see where it is. And this is the background I'm using for this look. Now you can see, actually, sorry, I didn't build it on this ME. Build it up here. So we're going to switch this up. Go to backgrounds here, go to ME1 here. You can see that it changed over here. And then you can see that I already have them pre-done here. All right, so key 1, key 2, key 3, and key 4. I'm only going to use keys 1 and 2 for this particular scenario, but I'll hit key 1 here, and I'm going to show you, I'm not going to hit it yet, but I'll hit key 1 here. I'm going to hit key 1 here. This comes up. Now you can see my background changed because I wasn't holding down background. So I'm going to hold down background, hit key 1, and now this has come here. And that is my camera that I have right now. So you can see as key 1 lit up here, you can see that key 1 is activated here on camera. Shows me key 1 here, DV. I'm going to hold down again and activate both keys 1 and keys 2. All right, so again, now you can see this graphics. This is my camera. And down here I have key 1 and key 2. I'm still on key 1. So if I go to key 1, right? See that they're ready? Camera, I'm going to hit. Now you can see it's changed. So now I can change this on the fly without having to do anything.
So what you've got the 2 rows on an ME, a preview, program, and usually the 3rd row is your selection for keys or DVEs. So that 3rd row where your finger's at is the same inputs, going down, up and down, but you're selecting in the row above it what you're going to send that to, like a router. So the 3rd row, you preview, program, and then the selection button row, the yellow one there, is going to go to wherever you've got selected on the row above it, which is the 4th button in it, looks like, which is probably your key 1.
And I just cleared it out by hitting background to go back to my background layer.
Those buttons over that he was hitting over off to the side near the T-bar, yep, that little row there, that tells the T-bar or the cut or auto button, which auto is basically a T-bar without moving the T-bar. It does the same thing the T-bar would do without actually physically moving it. Those tell the T-bar what to change when you hit cut or move the T-bar. So you can say, I only want to change the background, the preview program bus, which is called background, or when I move the T-bar, I want it to change the background and the key, or key 1 and 2 in the background, or just key 1. So that's how you work a big broadcast switcher.
I like it. I like it. So I see some questions are coming in here. Do you want to answer anything? I'll turn this around.
Actually, we have more comments than anything at the moment.
Okay.
So I think you're good to go for right now. But as Omar said, if you have any questions, get them in so that we can add them to the queue, so we can keep the conversation going. Omar talks really fast, so if we just let him go, then we'll be done with this in like the next 15 minutes, and we'll be twiddling our thumbs. So get those questions in, and we'll keep the conversation going. Go ahead, Omar.
All right, so, so listen, I'll slow down my talking a little bit. I'll think a little more precise with my verbiage here. But so let's do this. We kind of went over the switcher. I feel like we went a lot over in detail with the switcher. If there's no questions on that, I'll kind of just move to the next thing. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn this camera back around and show you. This is over here. It's called dashboard. So this
before you move on, Omar, I do want to point out with how quick you were showing, you were able to pop up those 2 pips really quick, which is something that maybe on software switchers isn't. You have to pre-build, right? Like you can do a lot more on the fly. Would you say that this workflow lets you do a little bit more on the fly than you could if you were doing vMix and didn't have something kind of pre-established?
So yes and no. I will agree that it looks like I do things on the fly. One of the things I say would be different is that, and I'll bring this up real quick here, and I'll turn the camera around. Guys, give me a second. I'll turn around. So when I click on key 1 here, and actually I'll do it this way. So in the menu here, you can see there's nothing selected. Once I click key 1, this one, which gives me X position, Y position, sizing, gives me aspect ratio, borders, soft, and then I get hues, Lumicolors crop, which I did a crop on some of these, V crop as well, and then freezing, which I didn't have to do that because I'm not switching anything out, and masks. So then that's kind of giving me the sizes you guys saw. Another way to do it would be with my T-bar here. I can literally adjust by twisting the knob here, going up and down and left and right by moving this. I don't want to do it now because I'm messing up my settings according to the template. But that's another way to do it. And so I have those preset for keys 1, 2, and 3. 3 is my backup for Zoom, just in case there's a double talk speaker going on. It's faster for me just not to have to think about what I'm doing, to just hit key 3 over key 1. It's just an upper layer to take in front of that. And that's another thing I guess we should talk about real quick too is you have background. So if you think about vMix, for example, right? If there's a lot of vMix operators that are watching, you have your background on your main layer, and then you have 10 layers in front of that. So I have essentially my ME1 background, and then my 4 layers, which are my keys. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then ME2 background, right? And then another 4. So that's how you can build up those points, those pips, essentially those pip windows, which is what they're used to be called. What I will say is on a media server, it is much faster because obviously I just drag that into a layer and I resize that layer to whatever I want to, and then I'm pretty much done, right? So it's a little quicker, and you can kind of do it in the background without being seen. There is a way to do that, obviously, in preview here and get that to be sized up correctly.
Oh, looks like Omar might have froze on that phone.
One big advantage of broadcast switchers over media servers is that you can instantly cut sources inside pips. You saw on that selection button, you just hit the cameras and they just instantly change, and that can be done on the fly while you're calling cameras. Oh, this is a better shot, take it. Where on a media server, vMix type thing, you're switching to a different preset that includes that. So you don't have to build as many presets. You just have to build the frame and the boxes, and then you populate the boxes with the sources you want on the fly. So yes and no. Sometimes building the boxes is a little slower, but putting the sources in the boxes is immediate.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I was going with that. That yes, you do still have to make those looks and you're compositing, but once you have them built, you can cut cameras into it where you would have to do presets or some kind of shortcuts in vMix or something to be able to actually switch those sources around. So yeah, that's kind of I think where I was going with that, Dave. Thanks for.
And it's also great for primary backups. If you have a primary and backup background machine, it's literally just change your background. It's a quick punch, things like that.
Right. Yeah, you can do live backgrounds. Yeah. If you're feeding them in from some kind of playback device, or graphics,
or even PowerPoint.
Machine. Right.
Yeah. And so where in a media server you'd want to build, or vMix, OBS, you'd want to build a look that included that background with that front source pip. Here, you just build the pip, and then you decide which background machine's in, and you decide which source is in the pip on the button panel. Do we get Omar back? I see some.
Yeah, it looks like we got Omar back.
Sorry. So, Hotel AV, right? I was on the Wi-Fi to give you guys a better service. Now I'm on my personal cellular data. So hopefully that gets good enough service in where I'm at in Naples. But yeah, so I'm pretty confident Dave kind of covered what I would have said anyway. So I'll move on to the next thing, unless you want to go back to that or show a visual of it at least.
Yeah, we just touched on how once you have the pips built, that you can cut very quickly and easily to sources to fill those pips, rather than having to, program presets for each camera look like you might on a Vision Mixer. So
correct. And like I was, no worries. And like I was saying, obviously once I have it popped up and populated in sizes, it's very easy to do. I would say the easier part on the media server is that you can create that kind of whole look and just have it come up as a single macro on this, right? I did macro 1, for example. I want to see camera 1 with graphics. Okay, boom, that's macro. That's my macro 1. Let me click that, send that, boom, it's done. So there is a quicker way to do it. I guess it's neither here or there really when it comes down to the nitty gritty of it. But I would say for me personally, I would say media server is a little bit faster. What about you guys in the panel here? What would you say, media server or switcher? Or in the audience out there?
I say media server is much more visual. If you work a broadcast switcher all regularly and you know the shortcuts, you can probably do it equally fast on a broadcast switcher. I would rarely say that it's always faster on a broadcast switcher.
I agree with you. I think there's pros and cons of both. But yeah, so one of the things that I guess is not being discussed, or maybe the elephant in the room, is that I do have to kind of remember not only visually what's in these rooms, but also what the look is. And because I have it preset and built out, if this needs to change on the fly, it would not be as quick as I could do it in a media server. So there is a kind of quickness to it. And again, if, like Dave was saying, if I was a better switcher operator, I may be able to do it faster. But I honestly think between the two media servers are just faster. I do enjoy, as a video engineer, the visual aspect of it, because it just gives me that sense of confidence that I always kind of hesitate when it comes to switchers to, like, okay, here's ready to go. I'm waiting for that cue, but I'm like, so here's the thing. If you do keys and backgrounds wrong, I'll say it this way, right? There is a way that you can do this wrong, and when you take it to screen, you don't send the right thing. And that's always a nervous thing to do. Once you're confident in the build, it's different, but you can do a background and keys in preview, and then have something somewhere else slightly changed, and then you take something different. That's not unheard of. It's not good if it happens, but you can't have this scenario. And also, if I am live, I need to change something. So let's say I'm live on my key 1 and 2, I need to change key 1 to the zoom versus the camera. If I'm not selected on the right keys, because I forgot, or because I was changing something else, I will change the wrong key or the wrong pip window, and that'll be an issue. So there is a little bit more that has to be done memory-wise. It's kind of to what you're doing with the switcher, versus that media server where that visualization is, hey, I'm just going to drag this into that pip window, and boom, it'll swap out. So yeah, I guess you talked me into it, Dave. I talked myself into it. Media servers are just faster because it's visual, and there's less things to think about, and it's a faster process. But I started off on switchers, and then I moved to media servers. I obviously love media servers, and I went down that route. But switchers, they're still dear to my heart. And when it comes to cameras, I need a switcher. So I need as low frame latency as possible, which I can't really get in a media server as effectively. Not that it can't be done. It's complicated, but
well, and
I would say it's a visual thing.
That's a great point too. Is the latency when you're talking about live cameras, and since we're talking about hybrid, there could be IMAG on screen or a composite of a person who's in the room presenting and someone who's remote. So I don't know if you plan to get into some of that, but yeah, maybe if you want to touch on any of that would be something I think that would be interesting to people.
So I could touch on that. Yeah, I'd have to think about it a little bit more. Can we give me like a scenario where I can kind of dive into it?
Well, I can throw one out there. I did a meeting on an LED wall in Boston before the pandemic. This is four years ago or so. And they told me after what we were doing was watch out media server. And we had an upstream switcher to the inputs of the watch out media server. So picture 4A or the Carbonite like you have feeding into the one SDI input on a watch out machine. And that was stretching it and giving me the right resolution for this oddball LED wall. Well, they came to me and said, oh, we're going to Zoom. It wasn't Zoom, it was Polycom at the time. We're going to bring someone in and talk to them, and we want them to pop up in a window, which was very easy to do in the watch out media server. And that's how we were doing all the PowerPoint or playbacks. But I knew the latency would be so far off that their lips would match and it would break the discussion, cadence. So what I did was on part of the LED wall, I ran the output of watch out back into the switcher because it was a multi-ME switcher, and ran it in the other ME and just brought in that teleconference person at the time. Let's say they're Zoom now, and brought up that window, but I could only bring it up on half the screen because that half of the screen was going through the switcher. And then the time was real time. It was a real time interaction on that PIP in the room for the attendees. Of course, the next thing they threw at me was, well, we want 2 pips. We want one on each side of the screen. And I was like, sorry, I'm out. We don't have any more resources. We used up our backup, resources. So yeah, that's where you'd want that real-time interaction in the room, and you want that to go as short a path through a switcher, a real switcher, not a software-based switcher, as possible.
Yeah. So we brought out 2 things here that we didn't discuss, right? So when you're doing a switcher versus a media server, one of the things that I didn't touch on, which you brought up, which is great. I do have ME2, ME1 kind of being able to feed one into the other, right? And the way I do that, and I'll show it here, is so essentially I'm taking out this ME, it's coming back on input 13 here. So I have input 13. So essentially my screens, which is my screens here, sorry, which is my live side, I would go to 13. And then this essentially anything I did on this top one here for my streaming would also go to the live side on the stream side. And that's how you guys kind of essentially can change it. So now what happens now, if let's say I'm streaming and they're seeing this, and I send it to the room, they see the same thing. And then if I need to, for whatever reason, just say, oh, okay, we're done here, but I need to still send to the stream something, I can just change down here to the live side, maybe send my logo up there, and continue to switch for the stream side. And that's one of the things the media server does. Now, another thing we talked about here was that you guys were saying how, when it comes to the video side of things, the latency of things, and the ideal scenario, right, which this shows perfect for that. In the ideal scenario, you should always have the media server controlling the screens, the DSMs, everything's going to the audience side. And a camera operator should have an ingest from a program out of a switcher to get that zero latency stuff. Now, that's not to say I don't know operators, E2 operators, or Sender, or Aqualine, or Spider guys who have done cameras internally to that, and there is a delay that has to happen between audio and video to get that correct. And depending how big that is, that could become detrimental to the show, because there could be a big delay. And the best way to test that is doing a clap test. So when you're going into these machines and you want to check the sync, you can do a clap test, which is very, very visual, very quick kind of way to figure out those situations. The reason broadcast switches are so paramount to what we do is that they provide that zero to low latency, a frame or two for videos, which is why you always want to have a switcher for the cameras going into something going to the screens. Another thing I'll bring out is like a media server. One of the things that Ed had said earlier is that media servers are broadcast specific, so they want to do broadcast standards. So, example, if I want to send out to an LED wall, like Dave was saying, 3040 by 1080, for example, right, double wide, and the LED wall may be slightly different, whether it's width or height, I would have to go through something else, right? So the LED wall will send out a broadcast specific resolution, and I can't really customize that. Unlike a media server, again, depending on the media server, because some of them have those limitations, depending on the media server, I can customize that a little bit. So I can send out to, let's say, the Brompton or the eVision or the Novastar, I can send out the correct resolution to that machine. Now, that's not to say that that's a limitation, because obviously the machine can take that and scale to where it needs to be. But that becomes an extra kind of step in the pre-pro side when it comes to figuring out, okay, if I'm doing a Carbonite switcher, or if I'm doing a Hannibal 4A switcher, or a Blackmagic switcher, I can only send out these broadcast specific resolutions. I need to make sure that my content is created so that when it gets scaled up to XYZ resolution for the end machine, it still looks right aspect ratio wise. It can't be doing 2 different things or be too far off from 16:9 to 4:3 or 16:10. I can only send out 16:9, but I need to do 16:10. You might be okay with a margin of error, but just there's some sizes that might be different. And those are things you want to consider also as well when it comes to media servers versus switchers. Now, Carbonite in particular, they do output, let you output to do projection blending up to 2, right? So you can do 2 wide, you can do 4 wide, you can do 4K. You have the DA to do a convergence for double stacking on the other end, but you are still limited to that specific broadcast specifics. So you can't get out of that range. So when considering those factors in, you could also just go and do broadcast specific and do your screens custom so that you can get the right sizing or things like that. Those are things to consider when you're choosing between the two. I always recommend, if you're going to have cameras, send it to a switcher. 2 cameras, 3 cameras, whatever it is, send it to a switcher, and then send it to a switch that's meant for that, and then send it to your media servers. Don't do it in the media server. Just, even when you're doing it virtual, you're just asking for trouble down the road. So that's always a concern to have, which is why a lot of bigger end shows will have those two different positions. Does that really answer what you're asking yet? I'm sorry.
I think so. it's just, so yeah, we were talking about, I think we were talking about latency. Sorry, I was also reading some of the questions that were coming up. So, I kind of forgot where we had jumped into that from. But what it sounds like, everything you're saying, so the way we've been doing virtual, we haven't really had to worry about these latency issues. The same, we think about maybe how far off from real time the delivery is hitting the audience, but we're not, meaning the online virtual audience watching at home. But when you put in an actual person that's in a room and then you're putting their own image up on a screen, we're dealing with a different layer of latency, because there are people who can actually see the person speaking in real time, and you don't want to delay your audio in the room so much so that to meet the video, because then you're going to distract your presenter's going to hear themselves doubled, if it's a long enough delay, or it's just going to get weird. So when we're thinking about hybrid, that's the can of worms of complexity that we've opened now, as far as that goes, and thinking about which order you do things in. If you're going to have your switcher first or your media server first, or or do you have your media server before your switcher, and let your, and then maybe have even a sub switch for just cameras, so that your switcher, like an E2 or something, is doing your screen management and your media server is pushing your content out. So there's, and then, like you said, with video walls, LED walls, that's another consideration because of custom resolutions and EDIDs and stuff. So there's, it's a very complex, plate of spaghetti, and we have to make it make sense. And it's just kind of this whole thing. And if we don't figure that out ahead of time, we can run ourselves into trouble. Omar,
so,
go ahead.
Yeah, let me ask you this. Let's turn the tables a little bit, right? Because now that hybrid is becoming more of the kind of norm in the industry moving forward. When we were doing these things, prior to COVID at least, right? You were kind of in your own bubble, your silo, right? If you did video, you did video. If you did audio, you did audio. If you did lighting, you did lighting. Now that's kind of being merged together, audio and video. They're still separate positions, still need to have various skill sets. But what are some things you're seeing in your hybrid events as an audio engineer that you're running into that maybe some pre-planning or pre-pro can come into play, or that's just like, hey, these are just things that happen, you got to be prepared for when you get into these scenarios?
Yeah, no. So it's funny because I had a very interesting event the other day where I was the freelancer hired by a subcontractor working for an AV company that was hired by the client. So I was 4 layers deep. I was like the total bottom of the totem pole, but I was the person on site who had to make it work, and had zero input into any of the design, only saw it when I first got on site. And they ended up doing mostly using Zoom, and they actually used Zoom as their switcher for both the audience that was in Zoom and for our in-room. And there were 5 sites that presented, and they kind of cookie cuttered it. But the site I was at was like the main hub. So they had more things. They were playing back the video rolls and all this. And it got to a point where they really didn't think about how they were going to feed screens, different content than what the Zoom audience was seeing, and dealing with like not hearing ourselves back in the room. And somewhere they decided that where I was feeding audio into in Zoom and where we were taking audio out of from Zoom was not the same machine that we were getting our video feed from, because they wanted more control over what went to the screens. So I was pulling audio out of one laptop, but we were seeing video from another laptop, and those two drifted in time. Yep. So I spent the entire event with my delay knob turning, catching up to the video as it drifted further and further in time. I started in rehearsal. It was great. We were also on Wi-Fi, which again, horrible practice, but that was what it was. And I was at 99 milliseconds of delay. I was great. It looked good. Everything was great. As soon as the room filled up, and now everyone's on this Wi-Fi, and these two machines are now, drifting. I ended up with over 2 seconds of delay by the end of the 45-minute presentation. So it was, had there been more forethought and more equipment on site, and what's crazy is I had another ATEM switcher in my car, but they only rented the one, and by the time we were this deep into it, with what they kept changing, there was no time to get that implemented. But had there been a better plan and thought of, we could have avoided some of those issues. So there should be, when you're thinking about hybrid, because as you mentioned, we're kind of all in our own little bubbles usually when we're an operator or a position. And in virtual, maybe that bubble was, we were encompassing everything if we were using something like vMix or what have you. But now that we're doing, essentially we're producing two completely separate events that are using the same content. There needs to be, I think, someone who oversees the entire thing and has the big picture in mind to address those things. And they just have to be hyper aware of, what points in the chain are latency being added for the in-room audience. And again, it's not that the in-room audience is more important. It's that you have the added factor of they can actually see the person who's standing behind a lectern talking. And, if there are someone who talks with their hands and they're doing this in virtual on Zoom or YouTube, wherever you're watching right now, you can't tell how late you're seeing that compared to when I'm actually moving my hands right now. But if you're sitting in the front row and my hands move like this, and then, 2 seconds later you see it on the wall, well, that's going to be, look silly and isn't going to be what the end client is going to be happy with. They're going to say, why was there so much delay? Even a half a second looks like it's way, way behind. So, thinking about that, like when we did IMAG in the past, we were always striving for the lowest latency within our in-person setup. But now, if we're compositing things in a media server or, in a switcher or in a vision mixer and then sending it back, we have something to contend with, and we have to think about, where is this going to impact me the most, and how do I lessen those paths and not have the latency. And especially if you're doing a remote two-way, if you're talking to someone at a far end, as Dave mentioned, you don't want the conversation to lag and drag just because you're waiting for the call and response. Or if your audio path is shorter, you don't want the video to be lagging so far behind that it then looks like a spaghetti western or a poorly dubbed movie. So
yeah, one time I did an event in Texas, and we had a big projection, multi-screen blend, and the company that spec'd it out spec'd a software camera switcher going into a Spider, and all the frame syncs were turned on. They didn't gen lock anything, and then it was using scalers in the projectors. I mean, they were scaling so many places that by the time the pips got up on the screen, it was a good second and a half behind. And then they decided to do to IMAG Q&A. So they would hand a mic to someone in the front row, and they would be asking a question. We would take a camera on that person, and they would start talking slower, watching their lips not match on the screen. So it's really critical whenever you're going into a live situation that you think about how much latency is everything adding between my camera lens and that final output that the audience sees. One good thing is that sound travels slow. So when the audience is seated, say the front row is 20 feet back from the stage, you have some time for the sound to get there, depending on where the PA is timed. So you get, about 20 milliseconds of air in there, and that's kind of a hard thing for people to grasp at first when they don't think about it. But yeah, one thing that I've been really blessed with through the pandemic is I had two companies that I worked for pretty regularly. Neither one of them really got big into virtual, and so they had tons of hardware for me to throw at every event I was working on. And so we've been doing all of our virtual with just like it was a live event in person with real broadcast gear, like you're seeing Omar use. So we haven't had those latency issues, but clients get a little wigged out when you load in 20 laptops and a big switcher, and and you're filling up their boardroom with gear. But we haven't had that latency because we had the live gear from the start.
Right, and you lose some of the convenience of being able to use things like NDI, but you also know it's going to be reliable and it's going to be as fast as it can be. So, and then you're using, I'm assuming you have to be using external encoders, which, I mean, that's another whole talk too. Like, when we use something like a vMix or an all-in-one sort of solution, we've now put all of our eggs in a single basket that, when we're using switchers and playback devices and things like that, that we're, if something goes down, we can either work around, find a workaround for it or replace it with a backup pretty quickly, which is a little more difficult the way we've kind of been doing it the past 18 months of like a single machine is handling everything and all that. So not to be too sidetracked from our conversation, but those are some of the considerations that I'm seeing as we're doing more of the hybrid events.
I think another thing, real quick, to jump in, is in virtual events, if something goes wrong, you can blame the internet. In an in-person event, if something goes wrong and it happens on screen, the client can just walk right behind the curtain and get you. And so that's where you start to build up those redundancies. If you're doing playback, you have a primary and backup. If you're doing PowerPoint, you do anything. My protocol before COVID was anything that's running on a generic computer, I have 2 of them. And so when vMix and all this virtual stuff came out, and I was like, if you're just doing it all in one, that doesn't make sense to me, So luckily, like I said, we were able to use a lot of broadcast type gear in our virtual stuff and only come down to a single computer doing a single thing like encoding or Zoom, a single computer for every Zoom participant type of deal.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Those are, that's, it takes a lot more hardware to do it, but I agree. If you don't have 2 of everything, you don't have backups. So, let's just, let me see if there's any questions, because we did have a couple questions come in.
So while you look for those questions, I wanted to ask Justin here, on your side of the spectrum, right? And I have another one for Chris as well. What would you say has been the most, when it comes to doing hybrid events, right? That jump you had to learn from being a video guy to now learning all this audio stuff? Was there a deep dive into audio, or was it just like you were well enough versed in both of them to kind of, when you started doing streaming and stuff, you just kind of knew what needed to get done and how to do it?
I personally figured it out pretty good, and I'm kind of looking over at my vMix right now. If you wonder why I'm looking around, like the buses, the audio buses, and some of the stuff that some of the specific clients that I was first using it for, the way they were doing it through multiple machines and everything like that, kind of got like a little trippy for me with NDI and stuff. But once I kind of took the time, kind of followed their path of how some of their shows were engineered, it made sense. I'm used to it now, but yeah, first coming into it, coming from video, you're like, oh, so there's all this audio and getting this routed here and setting triggers and muting people, making sure people going out to master versus backstage shatter. And yeah, I mean, it was kind of a process looking back. It was, about a year ago now. But now, it all makes pretty good sense to me. I've got it figured out now. It took a while on the audio, but the video stuff was pretty straightforward for me.
Yeah, no, same boat as you. There was a lot of things that I knew about audio that I understood, but then when it came into virtual, yeah, I was learning a whole new workflow and kind of really some of these things that I knew or I was aware of and how they're supposed to work. I had to really know how it works for virtual, and it became a different thing. But my question for Chris is, you're coming into the industry from another industry, and you learned video from me, myself, and other people in general. Now that you're getting into this, doing hybrid events like the one you just did, what are you seeing as some of the things now, and I haven't a feedback on that, but now that you're going from I have control of everything to now I have to share control, right? And I have a fundamental knowledge of how this stuff works. and this guy's struggling maybe on something. What has been your approach with what's going on now that you're getting to some of these more hybrid stuff where you're having more operators and more people with more control of individual stuff?
So it's funny you say that because when you are, and of course my NDI hulks out right now.
Don't get mad at us, man.
But,
Come on.
No, the internet's kind of up and down right now because we got storms rolling through and everything. So, but it's kind of funny that you say about control, because when you're streaming at home, you have control of everything that's coming from your computer that everybody's looking at. And then when you go to, like you said, these hybrid events where, like the Bacardi hybrid event, it wasn't just me controlling everything. We had 2 PowerPoint machines, we had a Zoom machine, we had a couple other things, and we were controlling those by the switcher, and it was making sure that the person running the switcher was queuing them in time and everything like that. For me, it's when I sit down, I mean, I've been fortunate enough the last 2 hybrid shows that I've been with, I've worked with people who are really good. One of them was Sebastian. So Sebastian's really good and knows his stuff, and it was very seamless. And the other gentleman that I worked with, his workflow is very similar. He was, V1, but took a back seat on just being the PowerPoint guy and things like that. So the communication was very seamless. There have been shows where it's okay, I'm running everything in the back by myself, but then it's okay, I have somebody else sitting back here that, we're going to have the lighting guy help you switch the PowerPoints and stuff when they need to be switched. And it's like, okay, he understands his lighting, but does he understand this enough to help when it comes down to it? And one of them, I ended up looking like an octopus back there, flipping all the switches and everything, because it was also at the same time that his lighting needed to be switched. So it was definitely like, oh, hit that button, we're good. All right, we're good guys, we're good. But no, communication, like the first thing that I do when I get on site, especially with a hybrid event, is because I am so used to controlling OBS and things like that by myself at home, is understanding who I'm working with. So it's like, Sebastian, I knew Sebastian, so as soon as it's like, we're good. Like there's no communication barrier here, like we're good. It was just like, I'd think it, and Sebastian's like, I got it, don't worry. But that's my first go-to when I get on site with anybody, is meeting who I'm working with, knowing who I'm working with, understanding their level of knowledge of what they're doing. And hey, if you need any help, just let me know, type situation, To go to your first question though, because I'm not an audio guy, the vMix audio for me was setting it up was seamless, right? Because it's the same thing in OBS. You know where all your stuff's coming in from, and you can get it in there. It was the routing, like Justin was saying, the master, the background chatter, and things like that. That was the hardest part for me, is like, okay, because in OBS, I've only worked off one bus line. Like just everything comes in, and I choose to mute that or I don't choose to mute that. Whereas it's like, no, you don't get that choice here. It's going to play in the background if you don't mute it. So that was a little kind of like a jump for me, and I obviously took the time to learn it, so that way I could use, I can use channel B as a back channel for my vMix callers, so that way they can still talk and communicate in the background, but nobody else can hear them, So there was a learning curve when it came to that and doing things like that. I think the biggest one was the one we did where I NDI'd everything in, and never had a problem with NDI before, and all of a sudden I was getting echoes and all this loop and feedback, and after diving and figuring it out, my current mixer that I use right now cannot NDI because of feedback loops. So I solved it by just getting a single channel digital audio mixer. So I come line out through my mixer into my secondary device or whatever device that's taking that audio in. But yeah, audio has been a fun curve. I did get Dante certified, so that way I understood the virtual audio signaling and routing and things like that when we get on shows that are going to be using that. So I can, because my mindset, and the one thing that Omar's taught me, and Ed, I've learned from Ed this as well, is you can know your craft and you can know what you're doing, but that's not what you're paid for. You're paid for solving the problem when it goes wrong on site. That's where your money comes in. So you could be the best video guy in the world, but if you can't solve a problem that happens when you're on site, you're no good to anybody. So like that's why I've taken the steps in learning the audio side that I've learned, is so that way when something goes down, I can be like, okay, well, where's the audio routed from? Fortunately, the Bacardi events are mixered, so it's just taking feed out and then it's one single line ingested into vMix, and the only thing I have to control in vMix has been the videos in vMix. But other than that, it's been pretty simple on that part, just because that's how they've done the audio. But it's also the hybrid event with having multiple mics put in and things like that. So that's why it's been laid out that way. But yeah, it's definitely been a nice curve. And like I said, the biggest part for me is just knowing who I'm working with when I get on a job site. That's all.
That's great. And my quick rebuttal to that, or not rebuttal, but addition to that, is that when I started doing hybrid events, and this was probably a few months ago now, the first show I did, and they had an audio engineer, and they had a playback guy and a graphics guy. I would say, and maybe Dave, you've seen this with guys you've been hiring lately, I kind of flipped on the TD mode for my own sanity, because I'm so used to doing everything that now I was like, okay, standing over PowerPoint, you ready? Okay, cool. Okay, you're going now. Playback, you ready? Yeah, you ready? Okay, go. Playback's going. And I'm calling the show, even though I'm just doing one position, because it makes me feel comfortable.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because that's something I picked up from you. That's for sure. That's definitely something for sure that I've done, because mentally I'm doing the same thing, and that's why I said when I worked with Sebastian, he was running the PowerPoint, the playback, and everything. So there was no talk that needed to happen. It was just, okay, playback's coming in, it's already in, it's already ready to go, things like that. But on other shows that I didn't know who I was working with, it's like, is PowerPoint ready? All right, PowerPoint's good. Camera one, we're good. It was definitely like that TD side picked up, and it was like, is everybody listening? Are we all on the same page? All right, cool.
Once you get to a certain level of live event with real, positions, you do have to get that where everyone has that cue point. Traditionally there's been that show caller or TD who said, these three things are going to happen on my go, stand by and go. And so as we're coming back from virtual, you're not going to be staffing, the clients aren't going to want as many bodies in the rooms. And so having one person kind of take the lead and say, we're all going to go on my go, or we're all going to go when this happens, can really tighten up a show that used to be really tight in a virtual. But now that you've got three people that all have to hit their buttons at the same time, you really need that entry point. And that's where I found guys who either never did in person before and came straight from virtual into live, or haven't done live for a year and a half. They got to knock the cobwebs off a little bit and get used to that cadence. It's like live theater. It's like actors saying lines back and forth. It's a very team sport. That's part of in-person events. It just wasn't there in virtual as much.
And Steve here in Zoom is kind of touching it on the nail here. He goes, he says real quick here, natural role, right? We're hired to just switch the camera. There's someone else who should be doing that. And fortunately, we are getting smaller crews that have to do more things. And I feel like now it's like part of my repertoire is just for me to feel comfortable. I need to kind of do that for myself. And if someone is a TD, and I just had this on another show I did, and I had to he luckily wasn't offended. It didn't do anything, but I had to step back, okay, not my role. Stop calling shots, stop calling cameras, stop suggesting things, because that's not your job. Your job is to shade. Don't do anything else. And luckily he was receptive, and he took some of my ideas and ran with them and didn't really question me. But I knew that I was stepping on his toes, and I was like, I need to stop. And it got to the point where even the client asked me, and I was like, no, I have to stop. That's not my job. That's this guy's job, and I'm not going to be rude to him like that. Because they liked some of the ideas. Because my creative side now is on another level, but it was rude of me to do that to him in that position, because it's not my job, and it's because of I don't want to say anxiety, but a comfort thing now. I need to know. But anyway,
we all want it to look best. We want our team to win. And I've been on a show or two where I'm shading or I'm doing playback, and I'm just turning off my comm mic and screaming camera calls into the drape, because I'm just saying, why are you taking that shot? I can see all the shots on my multi-view. That's the worst shot you can take, but it's part of being a team player. And sometimes you're not the quarterback, and that's okay. You just gotta, like you said, play the role you're given.
100%. Yeah. And like I said, Steve called the grid here on Zoom. And did I now that I bring up Steve, Ed, do we have those questions ready to go? I'm sorry, I took us way off track.
Yeah, no, that's fine, man. Great conversation. The only thing I'm going to add before we move on is for people who learned audio routing and audio from vMix, I'm so sorry, because vMix audio is like not how an audio person does audio. So it's and for those of you who came into it and were like, I thought I had a grasp on audio until I started doing vMix, it wasn't you. It's vMix audio is just it's very flexible and it has a lot of features and options. It's just not the way that an audio person with an audio console does audio. The way the buses work, it's convoluted in a very odd way. So don't feel bad, and sorry if you're going to feel like you have to relearn audio when you get out into the real, in-person worlds, because it is a bit of a different thing. You're really learning how vMix does audio, and it's just a very different setup. And then to Omar's other point, it's that it's funny because you felt like you had to pull back on that last show. You were just talking about it as an example, and I keep finding myself getting thrown into more jobs than I want to be doing, because like I said, like that one I was just talking about before, they rented my little ATEM Mini. So now, as the audio guy, I kind of had to do some video stuff because they asked for an ATEM Mini, but nobody knew how to use it. So now I had to set it up for the lower thirds, and I had to set it up. And I'm like, okay, I still have to set up stuff on my end, guys. But, now I'm playing kind of video. And then I was also like answering Zoom questions because I'm kind of the Zoom guy. And, now I'm like, I'm here for one day. I was pulled in as audio, but I'm happy to help. And as Dave said, we want to win, so of course I'm gonna contribute, and I'm gonna be that team player. But it's funny because I'm finding, especially on small crews, and people are still kicking the rust off, that I'm getting pulled more in than I meant to. So, going to questions though, Roderick Williams on Facebook said he can't stay for the whole thing. He'll be watching later, so I'm glad you'll be tuning in later. But let's say we can't get this hardware. Would we be able to map a MIDI device to the important buttons? Speaking to the Ross, would you be able to either use maybe a Stream Deck, or can you map MIDI buttons or X keys or something?
So I don't know. I've never done it before.
Stream Deck does work on the Ross.
There you go. Dave knows. I would say though, if you wanted to be a Ross user or use a Ross in general, you can do what's called input mapping and lay it out. So you guys could, if you guys remember, and I can go back there if I need to, but you remember I had like playback 1, A and B, graphics A and B, and I had a blank in between. I set that so that I didn't, because I got chubby fingers. I set it so I didn't hit the next thing or the wrong thing. Someone made a comment earlier in the chats, I think on Zoom, I think it was Chuck Wojak. He had said that, you can also, when you're doing these two, you could hit the wrong switch or take the wrong cue to the wrong screen. That does happen as well. And like, for example, the reason my program feedback is all the way at the end is because I'm not using it all the time, right? It's only when I need to send something from my stream feed back into the live room. So I want to be far away from everything else because I don't want to accidentally hit that button. I don't want to put it in between something like that. And I want to make sure that I'm going to playback or primary and backup on my playbacks or my graphics, whatever that is. I don't want to accidentally hit another button next to it. So I left me that space. And usually what I do is, like, if I do cameras, let's say I have one camera or 6 cameras, whatever it is, I'll put those all next to each other, because if I mess that up, it's still going to a camera, right? Hopefully that's not moving around too much. And then I'll put a gap or a space, which is nothing, and then go to my next thing, which would be graphics, primary, and backup. I always leave spaces there just so that I can have that ability to, if I have to really quickly do something or something changes on the fly, I'm not gonna accidentally hit the wrong button, because if I do hit that spacer, nothing happens. So that's the kind of way, and you can change the colors. I'm limited on what colors I can change it to, obviously. If I got into submenus and dove in deeper to the color settings, I could change it a little bit more, but you get 4 colors out of there. You could change those 4 colors whatever you want to, but out of those 4 colors, I just, graphics world is one color, cameras are one color, and then zoom is another color. And that's pretty good for me to just kind of give me a quick visual of what's what, so that I can very quickly orientate myself when I'm looking at the board to see what's what. Dave, have you, and I asked you this because I haven't done it myself. I'm actually not a big Stream Deck user, to be honest, but have you plugged in the have you plugged in Stream Deck and Companion, and does it populate with all the stuff, or you have to do it from scratch?
So you have to. I wasn't the person who programmed it, but I used it. CPAC is a big, big show, 7 cameras and whatnot, and they had a Ross Carbonite and another Ross Ultra next to it for doing the stream switch. And what the main TD did, who knows the Ross really good, he wrote through Ross Talk, which is kind of an IP-based protocol with the Ross. He synced in commands from Stream Deck so that he could switch and cut if he took, because what they were doing was whenever they did a playback, he had the big Ross and the camera guy just had like one extra input that was whatever playback he needed to get for the stream. And so what this guy did was he wrote cues. If he needed to take playback 1, he hit the Stream Deck and it would actually talk to both Ross switchers, and it would put the input for playback for all of his playbacks was just one button into preview. It would put playback 1 into preview on his switcher. It would route the aux to playback 1, and then when he hit the button next to it, it would go and both switchers would switch. It was really slick. And the stream guy, he got sick of hunching over the switcher was in a rack and it just wasn't very ergonomic. So he plugged in his Stream Deck and they worked it out where he just held it like a game controller in his lap, and he just cut the cameras for the whole show for 4 days off the Stream Deck. I just did, I guess it was CPAC this year, and we used the 4A switcher, and you could hook up to the big HVS 2000, the 34 button panel, 3 MEs. You can assign MEs to a Stream Deck. You can assign AUXes to a Stream Deck. So my RoboOp had a Stream Deck, so she could punch through and see whichever camera she wanted to. She was operating with the Robos. The lighting director at front of house, because it was all network based, had a Stream Deck. He could look at any of the cameras to check lighting. And the stream broadcast guy was cutting on a big Stream Deck XL. So he had a preview and program bus, and I gave him the top, the third ME. And I could see whenever he was sitting beside me, but socially distanced 6 feet away, and he was punching, and I'd see his preview and program punching, the buttons would change and light up. And I was using the screen switch. So I had the 2 MEs for the center screen and the outer screens. And I was managing all the downstage monitors and such. But I could watch him cutting the show on that bus from a Stream Deck. Yeah, it was really slick.
So Ed, I think we 100% answered that question.
Yeah, we beat that one to the ground. Sorry.
Well,
yeah, no, that's great.
Omar, just to throw in, I was just kind of sorry. I was looking through Companion while you guys were talking right there. I don't see presets, if that's what you were asking.
Yes.
There's only, of all the 6 Ross devices that are in Companion, there's only one that has presets. I think it's like a hub, not a switcher.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, for the expression, you'd have to make all your own. There's no drag and drop.
Right, which Dave was saying he used Ross Talk to really make it work. So 100%, that makes sense.
Yeah, he spent some time programming that. The 4A, it only works with, I think, 2 models, the 100, 110, and the 2000, because they all use the same web interface. But you can literally just say, I want this bus or this aux to be this input. And it's just a Stream Deck thing. And a guy at a church wrote it. He wrote the Stream Deck protocol for it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it works really well.
What we got next?
So the upcoming questions are all kind of long backgrounds, so this might take a minute. Dave Page, he's going into a new role at the beginning of next month. There's a Blackmagic Constellation and 5 Ursa cameras, 2 of them on PTZ mounts. He's guessing that a common scenario would be to use one ME for the broadcast streaming side and the other ME for live IMAG, hoping to connect a laptop with the ATEM control software control to allow another person to deal with the streaming content, and then use the physical advanced panel to control the in-theater experience. Anything he needs to look out for, or do you have any tips to offer? Can you trigger video rolls simultaneously on both MEs? So
if you have a HyperDeck networked into your system, you can take control of that and play them from your Constellation. Constellation's yes, for the 1ME and 2ME. The only thing I'd add to that, since you have URSAs and you can control your shader internally, is set up computers. I'd have a backup set up for someone else if you wanted to. Let's say you control, like Dave was saying for one of his shows, you control on ME1 the live side or the stream side, whatever you prefer, and then on the computer networked in, they can control the other ME for you, your second operator. Also, if you have multiple computers plugged into the same network, which we did a show on this previously, you can have other people in the room with you controlling the shaders for the camera, so they can control that as well. And then as far as we didn't talk about audio on this, sorry. As far as the URSA cameras, the wiring for that is pretty particular. Obviously, output for HDMI and then return on the URSA's back for you for SDI to get that controlling of that properly. The Constellation is a great piece of thing. It is limited on resolutions, so maybe get some decimators for your laptops if you haven't gone in there yet, just in case, to make sure that they're plug and play essentially. Networking is a really big thing with ATEMs if you want to really make that kind of flourish for you and make it user friendly. Those are kind of my biggest go-tos at the moment. It's everything you wrote there was accurate. If you're just looking for that confidence to do it, yeah, you're right on point with it. The only two things I guess I really added was decimators for your computers to make them come in there and properly running, the bottom SDI out to the URSA on SDI input, and then URSA SDI output to your SDI top port on the same input to get control of that. I've seen a lot of people mess up on that with the Blackmagics. And then read the manual. Honestly, the manuals from Blackmagic are phenomenal. They really go in there and they're very visual, so like they really explain things really quickly. And they try to do it, in like layman's terms. So it'll be like a couple pages to describe something for you. If you can get the network set up and everything like that, the HyperDeck can be played from internally. You can have a media player, which again, you can add another computer for that and have someone manage the media manager for you to really bring in those contents. I don't remember top of my mind all the ins and outs, but like 1 and 2 is your media player 1, media player 2, and then 3 and 4 are the same. And then you have below that other options for video stuff, very small formats or very small like stingers you can use. There's a limit to the sizes and there's a limit to the file types on certain one of those, and I don't remember what they are off the top of my head, so you'd have to read the manual for that regardless. But those are kind of, I guess, all I would say really, if anything were to be added to that.
The only thing I'd add is you're not stuck with HyperDecks for video playback. AV Playback, I swear down in South Florida, they have HyperDeck protocol in their software. It's like Playback Pro on a PC, but it shows up as a HyperDeck to a Constellation. So you can write macros and have it trigger AV playback off a laptop, which is pretty cool.
I'll add one thing to that. Gregory Mizell is a friend of mine. He is the programmer designer of AV playback. That man will pick up the phone 24/7 for you. He will do your fixes within 24 hours, 48 hours, depending on how complex it is. He's constantly troubleshooting that thing. He's created 3 different options for AV playback. I don't remember top of my mind if all 3 of them have the HyperDeck codecs in there.
I don't know. You'd want to check it.
Yeah.
And one of them's more designed for like an SDI output card. One of them's more designed for like HDMI or computer resolutions out. I learned that on my last show when I talked to him. He's like, "Oh, you got that one? Okay, well that's more optimized for this." Oh, nice to know. So yeah, he's a great guy and a great resource. Like you said, he picks up the phone and man, that's a godsend.
Yeah, he's a phenomenal spider operator as well. Works a lot with Tim Durr and has his own business. But the guys that, when it comes to the architectural stuff and how to this software for AV, mad genius. He knows the ins and outs of it, and he can definitely, like David saying, get on the phone with you and deep dive and figure out your problem either over the phone or tell you, oh, you know what, that is a problem. I'll fix that right now and I'll send you the update.
Now, Omar, correct me if I'm wrong though, but the Constellation does scaling on all inputs, doesn't it?
I don't know top of my mind. Sorry.
It does have up-down cross. So, but that doesn't mean that it does interlace to progressive or vice versa. It will probably take a 720p and make it a 1080p, something like that. But if you've got something that's not 16:9 resolution, it's not going to stretch it. It's not going to size it. It's not going to do anything like that.
Right. Got it. Yeah. So my point was about the decimators. If because a lot of the Blackmagics don't have any scaling on inputs, where the Constellation does. But having some decimators, I'm a fan of them, so I would never tell someone not to get them. But you may not need them or as many as you don't go out and buy a dozen of them before you actually try your sources and see what you need to scale and what you don't need to scale. So.
You might be able to get by with like the $35 microconverters if your computers can already output the native resolution that you're running the switcher on.
Yeah, the Monoprice usually does pretty well too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Chris, you got the next question?
Yes, this one's also a lengthy one. This is from Mike Graham here in Zoom. This is helping out a local church to install a setup video production kit so that... Took it away from me.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were reading it from there.
That's fine. Video production kit so that as they return to in-person services, they will be able to engage remote attendees. So hybrid services. The kit will include 3 PTZ PoE NDI cameras connected to a PoE switch, along with a live stream desktop PC with vMix, which is also connected to the switch. Behringer 404 UMC HD interface connected to the church's existing mixer. We've already tested the cameras and audio to and from the sanctuary and Zoom using audio buses in ASIO drivers. There will be 3 monitors at the control desk and an 85-inch television monitor in the sanctuary. The pastor wants to occasionally spotlight pre-selected Zoom participants to do a reading during the service and project those folks onto the 85-inch television monitor via NDI using KiloView unit connected to the TV. Will not project pastor or any in-sanctuary speakers on the television. This should work. Yes, delay to and from Zoom won't matter, right?
Oh, it will work, but you will have a broken conversation. So if you were to try to have a conversation, you're talking 800 milliseconds minimum, maybe 1800 milliseconds, and you can't really have an effective conversation that way. You'd probably be better off getting something like an ATEM Mini and just a Zoom computer that's down in the 200 millisecond range, where he could have a conversation back and forth. So that's the only drawback. Now, once they're reading, it doesn't matter because they're not in the sanctuary. They don't know that they're 1200 milliseconds behind, and the audience doesn't either. But it's not going to be good for two-way. And I hate for you to spend that much money and not be able to do really effective conversational stuff.
I'll add to the... Go ahead.
You go ahead, Omar.
I'll add to the PTZ part here. If you have a patch decided already in the shop, which just kind of sounds like you did. And for people who are watching this, if you guys are going to do that PoE route when it comes to robo cameras, verify that there's three, I don't want to say brands or flavors, but there's PoE, PoE Plus, PoE Plus, and PoE, PoE Plus, PoE Plus. And I think it's PoE Plus. So each one has a different requirement. I know Bird Dog, thank you. Bird Dog, for example, needs PoE plus in order to work with the PoEs. You can't just use regular PoE or PoE plus or PoE plus. You have to use the three pluses, and that gives enough power down the line. And also that also causes a slight delay between the signal that comes back because you're doing it that way. So it's not true. There's an async. I haven't used KiloView before, so I don't know if there is a delay with that. I would assume always with anything where you add something to it, there's at least a frame delay. When it comes to streaming, though, that adds in addition to it, so you have to test that out in the workbox, which I would just say, guesstimating what David said here was probably accurate for that. I mean, that's what I would go off of. Sorry, I would go off of that advice. But I haven't used a KiloView, so I can't really say. Everything else you mentioned sounds pretty good. I'm assuming Behringer X32, is that what he said?
A Behringer interface.
Behringer interface. I'm assuming that's just to take XLR into USB to bring it to your system. That's honestly a great thing to do. If you're going to use this as a portable system, though, I would also make sure that you can do both, not just USB into a system, but also that you can send it output somewhere. Just because I'm a fan of Ed saying buy gear now and cry later about it, but also because a lot of times the more expensive stuff is going to be that it's going to be able to do more for you than just streaming. So buying just for that one specific scenario will end up biting you in the long run, because then it's like, I can't do anything outside of this package that I created, essentially, versus where you want to create a package that you can do multiple things with it, not just the one original purpose.
Buy once, cry once is the phrase I always
say.
What did I say?
I don't know.
Buy now, cry later type thing.
Close enough.
Yeah.
Cry all the time.
But also, if you're using vMix and you need to have conversation between the pastor and the guest, and they are pre-selected, you could create vMix calls to send to those. vMix calls are actually really low latency, down to like 100 milliseconds. That's like the only true way, like Dave was saying, to have some type of communication back and forth between live presenter and an audience member, or some type of video call, unless you go with having a Zoom computer or some type of Zoom interface set up right in front of them. That would probably be the best way to do it if you can do it that way.
Well, yeah. So the thing that's glaring to me, though, is that there is an audio mixer and an interface. So they're going to take audio out to the mixer that's going to feed the house, and then send the video of that Zoom NDI to the 85-inch. So the lip sync, just be aware that you're going to have to play with your lip sync of that Zoom call for sure.
And you'll want a mixer that has delay.
Right, exactly. So if it's an analog mixer, that's probably not going to work for you. And depending how you're going to take Zoom out and take that Zoom audio out to the mixer via that interface, if you're going to use a bus, you also could apply the delay in vMix if the mixer you have just for that one Zoom feed, if you had to line it up. But you're going to want to play with that a bit, because that's where I see that, it'll work. As Dave said, the conversational is going to be terrible, but if it's just one person talking, that's not going to be a problem, other than you want to make sure that the lip sync is on. So great. Chris, we got anything else?
Yeah. Go ahead, Omar.
I was saying, do we feel confident that we answered his question?
Oh,
I
did comment and say great information. Thank you.
Is there anything I know it was a long list, but is there anything we missed that we didn't comment on that we might have missed? I feel like I'm missing something that we commented on.
No, I think we covered everything in his question as far as what he was looking for on that one. Cool. Speaking of Kiloview, I am working on getting a couple of the Kiloview SDI to HDMI, HDMI to SDI, and the NDI 6 box that they have to try to test to bring on the show and actually talk about it. I'm just waiting for them to get their boxes in to be able to send me some demo units. So keep an eye out for that one. The next question is from Salvatore Gares. How often are your setups fully gen locked?
Oh, that's a good one. So that's a good one. Not very often. I would say it depends on the show I'm doing. 95% of them are not. The other 5 that are just like super high and I have a lot of things coming in and out, then yeah, but yeah, 95% no. And I will say that usually if I get a CCU rack, for example, it's wired up to do that and to send it out or in to whatever else I need to do it to. And again, 9 times I don't have to do any of that. So I will see reference and I'll see sync and I'll see time code, and usually it's a question. Hey, are we doing this or are we not doing this? How important is it for this particular show? I actually get probably asked about time code more than anything else, and time code usually requires a particular cable, depending on the box that it has. So that one is usually what I have to work on the most. The other 2 don't get asked too much unless there's an issue. This Ross Carbonite does it internally, so it has a frame sync internally, so I don't have to worry about that when it comes to CCU. And on this show, ironically, I'm doing a CCU as my, I'm doing a Sony camera as my primary ENG camera, and I'm doing a RoboCam as a cutaway. So I have 2 different things that I could have, but I didn't, because Ross is doing a great job doing internally. Dave,
you're only going to gain a frame. So if you're running 59 or 60 frames a second, that's a 60th of a second. Sometimes that matters. The only time I see Genlock nowadays with SDI is if I'm in a truck, which is very rare. But if I'm on a show site, everything's got frame syncs now, and just plug it and play.
Oh, that's a good point. I should add that most of the switchers nowadays, including Blackmagic, does it internally. So
yeah.
Right. I would say most of the shows I'm doing, none are not. We're not gen locking much at all. If we're doing things with, if you're doing things with Blackmagic, A10 minis, you're not gen locking anything for the HDMI. Where I do see gen locking sometimes is on the media server side. If you've got multiple frames that need to put synchronous content out, that. So you don't get tearing between your outputs. So sometimes that'll be gen lock, but I would say fully gen locked, no, I'm not seeing that at all. And you got to think too, when we're bringing in remote callers for these hybrid events, we're not gen locking any, Zoom or anything. There's just nothing we can sync that to. So, so that's No, I would say fully gen locked. Pretty much never.
Gen lock entails having a gen lockable source
exactly.
and a gen lockable switcher. So very rarely are all of our sources gen lockable. I mean, no laptops have gen lock capability. Right. Sometimes rack computers with a certain card will, like you said, for media servers. But so you just don't see it on corporate at all.
I want to say the last time I even gen locked was maybe a NAB show. It was like 7 cameras and we're using a Barco Screen Pro. It's the only time I ever really. Last time I screened, that was like 4 years ago. And anytime after that, it's been more of a request out of comfort. I don't know how old the commentator is, but I probably see never anymore anybody terminating the ends or putting that that 75 ohm at the end of the loop. I don't see that at all anymore. So I think it's kind of going away because it's all being done by the switcher now.
Yeah, the last time I used Genlock was Genlocking for watch out machines to an E2, and they were just trying to get the tearing down on a giant, really wide LED wall, and the tearing in between segments of the wall, and it didn't really. It did help, but upgrading the graphics cards in the machines helped a little more.
Yeah, I want to say I've done a Genlock. Maybe I'm trying to think. We had an E2 and a E2 and a LED wall, and we Genlock. No, we changed resolutions or changed frame rates, and that solved it.
That's a faster fix.
Yeah, generally. That was what we did. We changed the frame rate and it solved it. Sorry. Anyways, next question. I think we beat this one up.
Yeah. So Chuck Wojak had asked specifically for Omar, what is the most complicated thing you've had to do on a 2ME switcher?
The most complicated thing I've had to do on a 2ME switcher. So I did a show where we had 4 pips for 4 callers that were in person and on Zoom, and that was a little bit of a brain twister for me to remember how to bring them into 1ME and then make sure that I was in the right order, bringing them in that way. So like the one thing that media servers are great for, you can get a template and just put people behind stuff. This one I have to create essentially in front of it those pip windows behind a image, and to be able to remember like this show going out is going to be these 4, and one of them is Zoom and the other ones are here, or whatever the case was. That was the most complicated one I've had to do. I've thankfully haven't been in a show where I have to do more than 4. I know people have done more than 4, and I think that's where it would get really complicated. But for me, I've only had to do 4, and it was an interesting conversation because of the delay. So I don't see it happening very often anymore. And that one client we did it for was just one of those, oh, this shouldn't matter, blah blah. And we did it for the one day, and then that was it. So thankfully, it got easier after that.
Sorry, I just totally. To piggyback on something you just said. That is a good distinction between maybe how some workflows work in a Vision Mixer versus doing it on a switcher is, like you mentioned, some people will essentially make a mask with holes and put their images behind, their layers behind it, where on a hardware switcher, a big difference is you're always building in front of your backgrounds, typically.
Yeah,
so,
you could do a mask. You could do
If you want an odd-shaped,
right,
cut fill like a circle pip, that's the only time you generally go in front.
Yeah, it wouldn't save you too much time if you did it that way, though. And in media server, 100%, you'd be able to do it much faster, much quicker, and have much more flexibility to do things. In a switcher, I think it would actually slow you down personally to do it that way, because then you'd have to create that top layer as the mask, and then behind that kind of resize, and now you can't see where you're moving things around, so it could be complicated. But yeah, so to your point too, one of the things that switchers do very easily that I think gets forgotten on media server sometimes is borders around pips. it's kind of like a default on switchers, and I think a lot of media server guys forget to just add a border, which vMix, after I forget what version it was, did an update where you could just click on a button and add it, and it does it by pixels. So it was nice, but I think for a while the templates were becoming more popular because they gave you that kind of pre-done border, so you had that option, versus for switchers you always have that option to just add a border by rolling a dial, and it just gives it that really like clean professional distinction between amateur versus broadcast. Justin, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, just random question because my eyes wander. Is that switcher actually doing anything, or is that just like its screensaver mode?
It is in sleep mode.
It's okay. I was gonna say I see the buttons flashing, and I'm like, is somebody controlling it somewhere else, or is that just flashy for
good
flashing?
eye though?
Okay.
Good eye.
Okay.
That scared the crap out of me the first time I sat down at a Ross, and I hadn't touched it for a little while. I was like, what just happened? Why are things flashing? And realized all I had to do was touch a button, and it came back to life. So, great. So we have a couple more questions, and I'm thinking about maybe doing them a little out of order, just because. Well, Jeff Keithley made a comment about echoing what David said. TV trucks, Genlock is still a big thing. And then Salvador Garza made the comment for iMag, you can save anywhere from 16 to 33 milliseconds by Genlocking. So that's that frame. And that's depending, that Dave mentioned earlier, that depends if you're at 60 or 59 or 30. 29, that could be, that's because that's the time difference between those two frame rates. So just wanted to get those questions in. And then, yeah, I'm going to go out of order. I'm going to steal Chris's question.
Can I throw one thing in on that?
Sure.
Yeah, 16 or 33 milliseconds, like you said, is what you say by Genlocking. A Zoom call is 200 milliseconds. So, yeah, Genlocking doesn't gain you a whole lot, as far as I can see.
Agreed. I'm going to take Mark Barron's question because it's kind of related to Genlocking before we get too far. What about projectors? It's not Genlocking, but it's locking things in. What about projectors? Do you send Blackburst or such to lock these in?
No, I don't ever do anything I don't do any kind of, Blackburst I'd be used that to just see my detail, like if to see, and it's really just from visual to see whether there's a corner correction on it or something going around with the pixelation. Maybe the signal quality is not like there. Blackburst will kind of let me see that. It'll show me, it's black, white, individual lines. It'll show me if there's any kind of distortion in the image or anything like that going on. Yeah, I don't, maybe I just don't understand the question. Dave,
the only time I would see a need to send Genlock to a projection is if you're shooting it with a camera at a different frame rate or something, and you're seeing lines creep up. The screen refresh rate is at a different offset than the camera is refreshing. And then they used to do that, clear scan on computer monitors back in the day. And they'd line up the frame rates and you get a little line that crept. That's pretty rare. In most cases, I'm double stacking projectors if I'm doing projection. So they're both going at the same time and they're progressive. And so the screen's always full of image no matter what, if they're off. So I don't see a need for it.
Yeah, I've never done it. I would say to Dave's point, if I had the line scenario, that would be on the camera end is where I'd change the shutter. If I was doing a double stacked, so usually like when I do a convergence, I'll do a DA at that point and split it out. If I see an issue like that, which, I mean, if you're seeing that with your eye, you have really good eyes, by the way. But if that was an issue, I might come out of the projector, out of the loop out to the other one and see if that solved it. I want to say I don't ever run into that. I remember back in the day, and I'm not that old, but back in the day with old, what is a spinning wheel called?
Oh yeah.
There was a projector that had a spinning wheel. You would see the spinning wheel color wheel. Yeah, I forgot what they're called, but you'd see those projectors back in the day where they had the color wheels. If they were getting older or worn out, you might see them, or if you like looked at the screen and looked away, you might see on the side of you a bunch of colors pass by. That was a scenario where you would see stuff, and that was on the projector end. But I haven't really seen a scenario where my cameras are picking up the screen's refresh rate, and if they were, I'd again fix it on the projector side by changing the shutter speed or or something on that, and I wouldn't do the projector end. And another thing too is I would never want to have the the cameras be able to see the screen, because then I don't want to get that loop back if I'm showing cameras. I don't want them to see themselves on the screen, so I'd avoid that. The only time I'd ever do anything where it's particular to projector and camera is when I'm doing my color balancing and making sure that the colors that I'm getting are correct to what the screens are projecting outwards. I've had scenarios like that where we color balance the room, and for some reason there's like LED lights in the background and there's Lecos in the front, and it gives us this we get a white balance, but then it turns the projectors like a weird offset color. So we got to be mindful of that sometimes. That's the only time where I've really had to do that. But even then, hey, adjust the lighting so that my balance is correct to what the actual colors of the world are, not whatever the hell's going on here. Those are my only kind of scenarios where I'm really finicky and fine tuning those particular situations.
And I don't think any of those would involve Genlock.
Yeah.
Jeff Keithley commented that they used to do that on Barco projectors in order to save a frame of latency. So I guess he would lock
Damn.
the.
And I come from a Barco house, and I didn't know that. All right, I know something new. Thanks, Jeff.
And other people, Rob White agreed. We used to fix that within the cameras, though. So
in the cameras,
as you said, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I could see like where Dave was saying with double stack projectors, they might be not in sync, so that'd be a different scenario. But I just never had that come up, so it hasn't been an issue.
If you're doing like a super wide background, like a 3 projector stack on a giant screen behind the people on stage, and you're shooting that, maybe at a blend region or something, you might get some weirdness that Genlocking could help. And I can see where if you're putting them in iMag, you take the frame sync out of the projector by Genlocking it to the switcher, and you're Genlocking the cameras. So you're saving 2 frames. So you could be saving, 60 milliseconds in an iMag loop.
So to that point, I did a show in Vegas a few years ago where we did a double stack 3 wide projection blend, front projectors onto a surface, whatever, and then with the stage in front and all that stuff. It was pretty high up, and we had the cameras, and I don't remember, the cameras were Christie projectors, Sony cameras, and we didn't even see anything in there. So,
well, and that's where I went back to one of my very early comments. Usually on a show that's that size that requires iMag, the audience, the first row of audience is 20 feet back, which equates in sound terms to, give or take, don't get out after me, audio guys, 20 feet's about 20 milliseconds. So if you're saving 16 milliseconds, well, you're only, 4 milliseconds off at that point, 4 1,000th of a second.
Rob White has had said on Facebook he had issues with sync issues when signals are sent from a loop out of one projector instead of DA'd. Also to make sure your projectors are not using frame creation processing. So those are good tips.
I'll jump on what Rob is saying. I'll say I try to never, unless it's like some crazy scenario where I don't have a choice. I try to never loop out of anything. It just makes that redundancy to the back, like for a projector for a backup. If I loop out of the primary to the other projector, and the primary goes out, then I've lost my backup. So it just doesn't make sense to do that. So I always try to use a separate DA to split those out. And then even for video, I never try to loop out of anything. I always try to put a DA in line to send out to whatever locations, regardless. Even like with decimators, I'll use input and turn on my loop and my loop in my bottom, so I get all 4 out, and that's like those are going to one destination. That's it. They don't get resplit again or anything like that. So that way, obviously the decimator is my choke point, but I try never to use loop. I don't see the hey, I don't have another choice. I need to make it happen scenario. But like as a AV professional, that just doesn't seem like an option for me ever, unless it's like an emergency where reason we don't have enough decimators or whatever the case is, or turnarounds or DAs or whatever, and I have to do it this way, or the client's like, this is how we always do it, then all right, I'm doing it your way.
Chris, do we have another question?
Yeah, we have one last question. That's from Dave Page. It says, in a hybrid scenario where we're doing a separate live and stream production and we have a physical 2ME switcher, do you see any benefit to using the DVEs available in the switching streaming software, vMix or possibly OBS, on the streaming computers rather than just using the second ME on the physical switcher.
So I think the question is, and I could be wrong here, so correct me, Chris. I'm sorry. Is the question what's the benefit of using the 2ME versus having just someone else control the stream completely? Is that kind of what we're asking?
I feel like he was saying, would there ever be a scenario where you'd still want to use the vMix pips if you've got a 2ME switcher?
That's
Got
what
you.
it sounds like to
Okay.
me. Yeah.
I can answer that. Yeah, sorry. So yes, in my opinion, because the stream side needs to have its own kind of vibe and feel. The word I use is from the summit from people who are much smarter than me, where they say it's a fly on the wall, right? So I have a 2ME. I can only send you what I have here for the live side, but the virtual side needs to have more, right? There needs to be the countdown. There needs to be its own music, which is also depending what platform you're going to, right? If you're going to YouTube, Facebook, or some other platforms that might have copyright issues, you make sure that the music is different than what I'm playing here, because sometimes there's a copyright issue you don't want to get involved with. I need to have break content. If I have an ideal scenario, right, I'd have an MC for just the stream side, and you can have that, or you could have pre-made videos for the break so that you're not just losing that audience at that point. I think OBS, vMix, whatever the scenarios that you're going to, there are these content building elements that shouldn't be involved in the live side. They should be separate from all that. And that is a good place to have that reservoir kind of ready to go. Like for this example, we're using Wirecast here, which has some pre-made content for oh shit scenarios, or for just those in-between breaks, instead of me, putting a logo here where the audience gets to go out and either mingle or meet or eat or something like that for 15, 20 minutes, whatever the case may be, or go to the restroom. You're not going to want to see that same content. You want to see something a little bit different for the streaming side, that may be an audio with a cue break, or maybe a mindfulness break where there's a video talking about yoga, or maybe a countdown is going off. And I will say this, I'll add this, sorry, because then I'm on a tangent, right? When it comes to clocks and doing hybrid, it is hard to dictate that the live side is on point to the virtual side, because that clock, when it hits 0 and you're not ready to go because the live side's not ready for whatever reason, the audience gets lost, or they get discouraged, or they start talking too much. And if you don't have a moderator for that can end up being bad. So that's also another thing. Like I want to separate control of that, so that I can control, like, oh hey, we need more 5 minutes, let me add 5 more minutes, whatever the case is, and let me communicate that to the audience, because you want them to be engaged. Because the thing with streaming that I feel is kind of looked over sometimes is that when you're streaming to somebody, you're not streaming to an audience anymore. You're streaming to that one person, right? If you guys are watching the show right now, I'm talking to you directly. You and me are having this conversation. We're learning. We're talking, right? This is a direct conversation between you and me. This isn't me to the audience, to the world out there. No, this is between you and me. So that needs to be slightly different in how that's done, right? There needs to be a different way of eye contact, a different way of content for that, so that when I go away and you don't see me, you're still being engaged by something to say, hey, I'm still here for you, I'm still present. Versus on the live side, you go on stage, you talk to an audience, you're scanning around, you're looking at different people, you're looking over here, you're looking over there, you're talking at different things. Your engagement is because you're there and you're talking. But when you're doing a stream, the engagement is 2 people. So there needs to be a different set of material that I don't need to be burdened with on this side on my 2ME switcher. Not to say that it's not possible. I can have a graphics guy feeding me all that content, right? And you could do that essentially. But if you're using vMix or OBS, why don't you have that content pre-built so that it's just a button click for you as the streaming operator? Because also you should have somebody watching the stream. Because what if it goes down? What if it doesn't? What if it gets choppy? What if the internet goes down? Like today, for example, right? We had a team here. What if I was by myself presenting and the internet just dropped out? The show would have been done, right? And it's not specifically my fault. It is because it was the Wi-Fi that I was on. But if we didn't have a team here to pick up the slack for that, it would have been a disaster. It would have just ended. Versus that scenario where, hey, something happened here, or something happening live that we can't show, or whatever the case is. Don't worry, we got the live set taken care of. We're gonna put this up there right now. We're gonna put in this pre-made video for intermission. We're gonna do X, Y, Z. There's a whole nother ballgame that needs to happen that you can pre-make content for your client. Just the fact that you have an intro, a break, a kind of the oh shit button to go to, or the oh shit video to go to in between something, or even some clients have done stuff where we've done like hybrid sees one thing because they paid for this to see one thing, virtual sees some, and live sees something different. So you might do this one speaker is only for the live people. Okay, boom, this guy goes here, but the show, you can't just stop your stream, right? So you might say, they're gonna see this, you're gonna see a recap of yesterday's event while it's playing. Those little things are easier to be managed on the streaming side separately from that. Can it be done? For sure. But now you're bogging down the team with 2 different tasks for 2 different locations versus that like easeability to have ME1 feed into ME2 or your live to feed into your stream side for what's going on live so they can see the same content, and then having the ability to say, okay, now this is over. And the other thing too is you still need a break at some point. So you need to be able to let your operators take a break. In virtual, the break time, hey, go do this, go do that real quick and come right back to your room. In a hybrid scenario, if I got to do the live side and the stream side at the same capacity, I may not get that break time because now I have to also, as I'm playing logo up here, I got to make sure that the content's going here from whatever camera to whatever's going on. So I think if you're going to do it that way, the feed to virtual should be only being fed what the virtual audience needs to see for the live side, and there should be some elements of some content just in case for that virtual side. Also as well, for that scenario where you may have a speaker that's taken too long, or maybe they're flying in the same day and they're going to be there for a short period of time, maybe having a backup video of that speaker for the live side to keep on time frame is good to have, so that, okay, we'll just play this video off for these guys, but they paid to be here because of this speaker, so he gets to see him live. Like that's maybe some of the different things there, but having that ready to go for your virtual shows that, listen, I'm here for you. We're aware that you bought a ticket, that you're here. Like you're not just a fly on the wall, right? And I think that's very important to keep in mind. Sorry, I'm going off a tangent here, so I'm gonna stop.
I'll throw a real world example. I used to switch the Atlantic Festival, the main stage. And so I was on an E2, I was managing 3 LED walls and playbacks and lower thirds and cutting 4 cameras live. And I couldn't manage a separate wide shot switch in for the stream, but I was doing IMAG right over the people's heads. So I couldn't do any wide shots in that screen. And the streaming person had their own camera, PTZ camera. It was right next to mine, but he could pull as wide as he wanted, and he could do pans across, he could pick up audience takeaways, and he just sat there and played with that one camera and cut it in over my camera cut. And that just gave him something to do that gave the audience more of a live broadcast feel, because I was cutting head, really nice tight IMAG shots for the screen. And when he cut wide, you could see the tight IMAG shots right over them on stage. So you could do those cutaways that looked really nice, like concert, shots and stuff.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, like a show we did previously, which we talked about I don't know what show we talked about, but churches are doing this great. They're doing 2 ME shows constantly with hybrids, and they're having a whole team just for the streaming side, and they're doing kind of like esports sports where there is an MC and there's a person, so that as the live show has an intermission, whatever, there is another person on stage with, like, let's say like this, it gets talking to the audience as that break's happening. So while the live side is going out and doing intermissions, or they're going out to get bathroom breaks, whatever, there's someone talking about what just happened, and there's someone who's on instant replays going, oh yeah, oh, did you guys see that one part, or this one section here, let's play that back real quick, and then they see a little clip of that, and they're talking to them, and they're taking comments. They have a monitor in front of them, like, hey, oh yeah, thank you so much, Chris, for being here, thanks Steve for being here, thank you, Chuck, for being here. They're talking to the audience and making sure that they feel engaged, because they're not there, they're giving that extra kind of engagement. And again, that was a 2ME show that I did, and that second ME that even went out, the other guy had control again of I think it was 2 separate cameras. So we had 7 cameras total for the live, which got fed to him. And like David just saying, he took his camera for a wide shot that was in the back to kind of show like, here's like the audience and the stage. And then he had another camera, which was, I'm sorry, it was 3 cameras. There was another camera for a wide shot, and there was a camera for a 2 shot, which is a robo camera. And there was another camera, there's another ENG camera next to it that was for the single person for like the main AC of the night. So they did the main AC, and then they'd bring someone there to do like little interview stuff, and they did the 2 shot, switch back to the 1, switch to the 2. And once that happened, he took full control of that. I had no control of that. I could see it on my returns just to see what's going on, but he had full control of it. He also had a full separate audio mixer for himself as well to control when he took audio from me versus when he took audio just to the stream side. And that ability to just kind of say, I'll send you what I can when you need it, and then I'll send you, the bulk of it. But that in between parts where, hey, we're on a break now, let's get ready for the next thing, and he's still managing the stream side, that just was a no-brainer for that scenario, because I can't, if I don't have that moment to take a break and say, okay, let's get ready for the next thing, because I'm still doing the streaming side, now I'm not useful to you. Now it's like, hopefully someone else is taking control of that, because I can't focus. I'm still working on the stream side. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I think there might be scenarios where you do send what you are sending on screens to your stream, where you maybe are using the switchers DVEs, but as Omar said, having the ability to build your looks for your stream that are independent of what's going on in the room, having the option is great. And and like I said, there might be some things where what's composited on the screen is exactly what you want, and so that it stays in sync going to your stream. Yeah, you might take that. And I think some of the stuff Omar's talking about, we see in sports broadcast a lot when we watch TV. Between segments points in the game where there's no action happening, there's commentators. So if you think of your and if you've ever been to a game, you always hear the stadium announcer. You don't hear the stadium announcer live on live TV. So if you look at sports as like the ultimate hybrid event, broadcast sports, is there's something happening in the stadium that the at-home audience isn't hearing. They're not hearing that announcer giving stats because they're hearing the commentators doing the stats and doing the talking and stuff like that. And then they do those interview cutaways like Omar was just talking about. Those are kind of segments while you're hearing the chants during the 7th inning stretch. Like maybe the commentators are doing a talk, because if you're just listening or watching it on a stream, that might be a little bit boring. So yeah, filling the gaps, and then like something like wrestling. If you think about like anything you've seen of wrestling, all that time that they're backstage doing all the theatrics of the storylines is the time that in the arena there's not something exciting happening in the ring, or there's maybe an undercard thing that doesn't matter. It's all the distractions. So you gotta kind of. I think Omar, what you were talking about is for that the audience that isn't in the room during those dead times, or the times where, they're taking the coffee break where you go outside and you get your terrible coffee and cookies, in the ballroom, you got to have some kind of content playing for the at-home audience. And that could be another MC, a totally separate thing. And maybe that's set up in a breakout room somewhere that you set up as like a studio, and you have that conversation, you do those recaps. So having that control with your streaming machine, and like things like lower thirds, you may want to put, even if you were taking the iMag from the in-room, right, for example, you may want to throw your lower thirds over the stream feed more often than the in-room feed. Because the people in the room know who's up on stage, and sometimes those lower thirds can be distracting when you're doing an iMag, and especially if there's any presentation and stuff. So having them in conjunction, yeah, sometimes you might want to take exactly what's on the screen. So have that as an input to your streaming machine, whether that's vMix or OBS as mentioned in the question. But I think taking advantage of the tools within those software for the streamed audience makes a lot of sense. And now, Dave, you work with fully hardware solutions. So is everything I just said wrong in your world?
No, not at all. But what we will have is a separate ME bus or a separate switcher like that. Right. I kind of fluffed my example. I said that the guy was adding that camera in with, picturing vMix in everyone's eyes. He actually had a small Roland switcher that just had 2 inputs, me and that camera. It was all hardware, and then it went to a hardware encoder. So he had, no laptops, but it could have been a vMix or an OBS system that had 2 inputs, me, my tight camera switch, and his other camera. And then he was able to put all the lower thirds on. So, there's lots of resources like that. Like in a church service, a lot of times they have LED walls behind them or a TV beside them that's got a verse on it, but maybe you don't want to include the shot that includes the TV or the LED wall behind them, because the iMag shot needs to be tighter for the screens in the room, and everyone can see the TV or the LED wall behind them in the room. So you would do a 2-pip configuration in vMix just for the stream that has the verse next to a pip of the preacher, let's say.
Right. Yeah, I can actually, just when you were talking about that second Roland switcher, it brought me back to way pre-pandemic when we were doing webcasts. I worked for an AV company.
Pre-pandemic, yeah.
Yeah, I worked for an AV company that had a webcast client. Like they sold the webcasts to the end client, but there would be for town halls. So there's a live audience, and quite often we'd have 3 switchers. We would have one switcher that was just cutting cameras with a TD. And the TD we used, he talked a lot, so we always wanted him totally on his own comms, and he could just deal with cameras. And then he would feed that to the in-room switcher, and also feed that to the webcast switcher. And then we would we'd be sending that out, one camera cut to both places, and then we'd be DAing all our graphics to both places, and have 2 different people cutting the show. Whether it was, so we're getting one switched camera feed, and he's just focusing on what the best shot is. So now your person who's dealing about looking at the run of show and content on the screens, or looking at what makes sense for the web, isn't also looking at which camera's framed perfectly and all that. And then we'd put on screen what needed to be on screen. We'd take IMAG when it was appropriate, and then on the web they'd be more often just taking the IMAG and then cutting in the content, where in the room it would be almost the exact opposite. We'd be on content more often, and then cutting in the IMAG as appropriate, so like handoffs and things like that. So yeah, that's how we did it back then. And we had only the resources that those switchers had, so we were running most of the time Blackmagic switchers for the camera cutting in the web, and then a Barco switcher or something for the in-room as a more of a live production switcher than a broadcast type switcher. So different tools for different aspects, and that's kind of how we pull it off when it was called webcasting instead of live streaming, and or how I used to pull it off in the situations I was working in. But there's a million ways to skin the cat, I think, as we've kind of come to that conclusion. As we're getting close, we actually have broken the hour, so we want to make sure that we start to wrap up. If there's any final thoughts, we'll take them before we wrap the show for the evening. Hopefully, Omar, you kind of got through all the stuff you wanted to show off on your side.
I wanted to show whatever you guys wanted to learn tonight. So I hopefully you guys learned about hybrid event switching. Dave gave out some great information. I gave it great information here. The one thing I would add to what you just said is, like, there's 100 ways to do this. There's no right or wrong way. My only thing with the way I kind of try to describe things is that the more you have people in positions that are competent, the less chance of failure happening. The more you pile onto one person, the more chance of failure. And that's not to say that that person isn't good at their job or they're not talented. It's just the more what you're doing. So if I was doing graphics, playback, switching, and records all at the same time, right? If any one of those things breaks apart, I have to focus to fix that as much as I can. I may miss something else. So just having that ability to delegate those and separate those is really the point when I was trying to say, like, yes, you should have something separate for that, 100%, because you want to delegate that so that you're not in charge of all of it, because things do happen and you can mess up. And like Chuck, I said earlier here, if I'm doing all of it all the time for 10 hours, I may accidentally at some point switch the wrong place because it is a 2ME switcher. And there's a lot of things feeding in, a lot of different things that have to happen at different times, especially if I'm having to manage ME1 is doing all these things at these different time frames and ME2 is doing these at these different time frames. And then at these times they're doing it together. Like, if I'm confusing by talking to you that quickly, think about doing that and trying to remember buttons that are more than just one button that aren't on a macro, aren't preset in a layer or a macro or anything like that. So those are just kind of why I like to delegate things and separate it, because when things do go wrong, you have that ability to troubleshoot without missing a cue, so that the audience doesn't see anything wrong. Only you guys know what's going on. And that's my big point to that. The last thing I'll say real quick, obviously, because I know we got to go, is huge shout out to Sardis Events for letting us kind of do this with their gear and everything. They gave us permission to, so I greatly appreciate that. That's one in a very long time that I've been able to do that. So thank you so much. Ross Carbonette is amazing. This show so far is great. Kurt, who's our lead here, like I was saying here, the guy is phenomenal. He knows this thing front and back like there's no tomorrow. You have a question, he can answer very quickly. He knows the ins and outs of everything going on with this show. He's doing a great job of keeping us on track, keeping us on board, and he's in a phenomenal lead. I mean, he just knows all the gear, all the equipment, what we're doing, how we're doing it, how we're plugging it in, what's getting routed where. So he made the show very easy for us. We were up and running within like 6 hours on day one. It wasn't for his ability to say, yeah, let's plug in here, plug it out over there. We'll do this way. Oh, there's a problem. I got you solved. Like Chris has said earlier, he's the problem solver man, and he's doing a phenomenal job at it. So again, Stardust Events, thank you so much for letting us use your gear and showcase your Rust Carbonite. It's a beautiful switcher. That's all I got.
I would jump in with some final thoughts, takeaways. As you're getting called to move from virtual to hybrid, and then maybe in live, you want to have latency in mind. Latency is the big differentiator. When you go live, you want that short path in the measure of milliseconds or frames from camera lens to the screens that the audience sees. And that's the big difference, because it doesn't matter in full virtual. So you can do things that have 2 to 5 seconds delay even. But in live, that's where it's all counts. And that's where you go from a computer-based solution to a hardware-based solution. And the price goes up accordingly. And when you have all this hardware, you can't reach it all. You can't run it all off a keyboard. And that's where you start splitting off, and the budgets need to kind of go accordingly to that. And you also need to, just advise your client that you're producing 2 different shows. You're producing an in-person experience and a virtual experience. And how during every step, every element in the show, what does that look like in both experiences? And are they both good? And are they both the quality that you want? That's it.
Just to quickly piggyback off that, keep in mind that your in-room, what's going on your screens, doesn't have to be the same exact thing that is going out to your virtual. I do get that from clients a lot, that they want the same branded experience in the room that they're sending out to the virtual audience, and that's just not always appropriate. Think about content, and every time you add a frame, build a border, branded thing that you would send out on the web, and you put that on the screen, you're making your content smaller. So, when we try to push LED walls or projectors and screens, we're like, you want it to be big enough that everyone can see it, and then we clutter it all up with a bunch of branding. Everyone knows the event they're at, and you can get banners for the in-person thing. So you don't have to throw all the same thing you're doing in vMix onto your screens, because that's going to add to that latency that Dave was talking about if you just try to do that. So I'm going to leave it at that. And I think since we're definitely over time now, we will say thank you to our panel tonight. So thank you, Omar, for the presenting. Bodhi, it's great to have you back. Glad that you were here. Thank you to Justin. Thank you to Dave. And again, thank you. Omar, which it was the name of the company you're with right now?
Sardis Events.
Sardis, yes. Sorry, I didn't want to mispronounce it. Sardis Events. Thank you for letting us use the gear that Omar demonstrated tonight. And also, let's make sure that we thank DVE Store for their continued support. The reason you could see everything in 1080p tonight is because DVE Store is a huge supporter, and they make that happen. Whether you watched on Zoom, YouTube, or Facebook, we were making it available in 1080p. So, all that crisp detail that you could see everything, again, is a result of the support of DVE Store. You can visit them at dvestore.com. Let them know AV Tech Talks is how you heard about them. And they'll be able to set you up. Guy and his team are amazing over there. They know pretty much everything about everything video and audio. So they'll be able, and broadcast, they'll be able to set you up if you need a PTZ camera, if you need a mix pre or something like that. Go to DVE Store, they'll hook you up. And again, tell them AV Tech Talk sent you. So with that, if there's nothing else, Omar or Chris, we will sign off to Facebook. We'll say and YouTube. We'll say thanks and see you next week, every Monday, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S. Adios.